Um, I'm very excited to introduce to you today our speaker. Rohene Bouajram is a renowned international speaker whose impassioned advocacy has stamped the hearts of her audiences worldwide. Zimbabwe-born and raised Canadian, Rohene believes in the importance of doing one's inner work to defy the odds of a preset future that are upheld by systems that have not been designed for everyone to succeed. So Rohene has studied several disciplines in Finland, China, and Canada, and has spent over 2 decades as an educator and leader in higher education academia, scaling areas of strategic program development, EDI, transformational systemic change, leadership, and student affairs. Rohene serves on panels, task force, advisory committees, and hosts a weekly podcast, which I think folks here will really enjoy, called Unspeakable Leadership, which explores the leadership of women of color. So, on a mission to redefine leadership, Rohine's captivating dialogues and writing echo a push for breaking generational and cultural biases to transform family trees and ultimately motivate the leaders of tomorrow to become the very change they want to see in what the world needs. Off stage, Rohene enjoys collecting passport stamps, she's traveled to 4 different countries and counting, running, reading, and holding her most cherished title, Mom. So I'll pass it over to you, Rohene. Very much looking forward to our session today.
Thank you so much, Kanishka, for that beautiful and generous welcome. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all during our time here at Culture Chat. I'm just going to get my tech stuff set up as one needs to during this moment in time, and really want to ground ourselves in acknowledging, as Kanishka beautifully did, to let you know that the land beneath my feet is the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, otherwise known as Vancouver, British Columbia. And when I often ground myself, I think of really my trajectory coming here as an immigrant and an uninvited guest, and how little I knew about Canada. Beyond perhaps the brochures that the agents who supported us with coming here and applying for immigration, I didn't know the history. I didn't know the present realities. And so it was no surprise that when I arrived here in 2002, that there was a shock, both to my mental, my emotional, and also my spiritual systems. And so it has taken a life journey and an opportunity to really reconcile being here as an uninvited guest in Canada, knowing that the history and the roots from where I'm from also have deeply historical colonial violence. And so it is part of my mission and part of my drive in really creating systemic change for various communities, particularly marginalized communities, and also working alongside my fellow Indigenous brothers and sisters in advocating and pushing for truth and reconciliation. And I don't say that lightly, I say that with my utmost reverence. I want to thank you for being here today. I know many of you have many things to be doing at this time, and it might be morning for you, it might be afternoon, and depending on where you are, it might also be evening. So I don't take that again for granted. Today, we're here to redefine difficult conversations. And I know some of you might go, yeah, right. What do you mean by that? So let me start off with, oh, look at that, the joys of moving ahead. Let me start with asking you a question. I want you to think about a time when you felt truly understood in a conversation. What made that experience memorable? Now, if I were to ask you to flip the coin and recall a time when you felt misunderstood, what is the current state of the relationship that is tied to that memory? For me, when I think of that second question, it's honestly a memory that still clenches my stomach. You see, the words that were uttered to me are the words that I'll never forget. And they were, I respectfully withdraw my request for your support. These words still echo in my mind. And at the time, they snowballed into a cascade of emotions that I had to suppress in the moment. Difficult conversations can be emotionally charged. They can also trigger defensiveness as well as a number of other triggers. They can erode connections, and they can also cast shadows of self-doubt. But here's the thing, they don't always have to be this way. So today, we're going to explore 5 principles that can transform these conversations into catalysts for genuine connections. Now, I imagine some of you are here because you likely have this question in your mind, and that is, have I hesitated to voice thoughts in spaces where I felt that I didn't belong? That's a question that I often think of, and honestly, it's a question that I still struggle with and work towards. So if you answered yes, I want you to know that you are not alone. In fact, studies show that almost 50% of employees in an organization are reluctant to speak up. And when you work in such large organizations, that's a significant population that is not telling the truth. 40% report ruminating for 2 weeks on an issue that they have stayed silent on. So one has to wonder what's going on. Why are environments or organizations not safe enough? And I think it's because of this principle, the first principle, and that is difficult conversations demand recognition for what they are. And there's also an evaluation that's attached to it. Each and every one of us will have a different self-assessment around, do we engage in difficult conversations or do we not? Now, the common pitfalls that I often hear from people is they don't like confrontation. They want to avoid it at all costs. Or there are individuals who feel like they might want to identify and embody being more of a peacemaker. And then there are others who feel like it's not their responsibility to fix things. And so I get it, especially in today's spotlight, where we have a range of contentious issues, where you might even find yourselves, particularly as racial individuals, being both the spokesperson of your identity, your culture, your race, your community, while living the very same issue that you're trying to explain. Now, when we bridge our comfort with the opportunity of a difficult conversation and having one, we can actually move the dreaded "can we talk" into a moment that catalyzes growth and honesty. But one of the challenges that often happens is that many of us are not ready for a difficult conversation. We can be caught off guard, or ourselves, we might want to have it, but not really know where to start. And so the second principle is really about regulation. I have a colleague who often tells me that they see red, especially when they see something that is related to injustice. And I've honestly witnessed this, and I get it, and I understand it. And on the other hand, imagine walking away from a tough conversation, unsure if a relationship is salvageable, especially if red is involved. So some of the things that I think of as I prepare are really these 3 questions. The first being, what do I need for a safe conversation? And really, what do I need to be safe in a conversation? Now, that might include things like physically, what does the room feel like? Do I need to have people in the room with me? Or do I feel more comfortable in a more of a one-on-one setting? The second question that I often ask myself is, what signs do I need to watch out for that help me realize whether or not I should continue the conversation or pause it? And this really speaks to being able to have boundaries. When we create good boundaries, we actually create more freedom for ourselves, freedom to play within the conversation, and also freedom to be able to watch out for things that help us make good decisions. And then the third is, what won't I accept in this conversation? And that's really crucial. For me, I personally am very comfortable with raised voices. I'm very comfortable with flowery language, but not everyone is. I've seen these now as expressions of one's thoughts or one's emotions, and so I don't judge them. So when you have answers to these questions, it actually allows you to respond and not react. It also means that you can build the clarity into your boundaries and keep your emotions in check. Now, I want to let you in on a secret. I am the queen of reframes. I have also had to learn how to breathe through conversations to allow me to stay in a green zone. And these are some of the strategies that I employ as part of having conversations like these. One of my favorite reframes is often when I see somebody crying in a moment, when I'm probably questioning, why are they crying? Like, this isn't about them. I used to get really angry and annoyed, especially if the topic was around race. And I had to really shift that response to a reframe. And the reframe that I currently use that I'm really finding is helpful is saying, I'm noticing that you're crying and I really want you to be present. What do you need to continue this conversation? When we use reframes like that, it helps us be able to articulate what we're seeing, and it also helps us hold accountability for the other person and ourselves. If you're looking for some reframes, there is a cheat sheet and a worksheet that likely is in the chat that you can certainly look at and employ some of the examples that I've provided. When we have strategies like these in our back pocket, it actually allows us to support a compassionate position for yourself and also for the other person to take. If I were to ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely no way, or 10 being sign me up, I want you to think about where would you evaluate yourself in being able to initiate a difficult conversation. I had always placed myself at around a 5 and a 6, which to be fair is like the neutral position, until I understood that addressing and naming uncomfortable truths is better than suppressing something that is hard to unsee. So the third principle about really releasing is to understand, why are you not comfortable? Why do you give yourself that particular evaluation? There could be many reasons for this. It could be that you don't feel safe, or you're fearful of retribution or consequences, or it might just be you don't know how to start that conversation or give feedback. And so there are a range of valid reasons. So I'd like to give you a model that can be really helpful, and that's the DAE model. When you spend time being able to describe what happened, it actually allows you to be able to stay within an objective stance. So, for example, if you're in a meeting and you notice something, really taking into consideration who was in the meeting, how many people, what happened, who said what. These are the details that help you move into an analysis, which is to really think about the different meanings, the different interpretations, and not get trapped into creating a story and a narrative. When we hold on to our stories and our narratives, it can actually put us in a position of wanting to be right, rather than thinking about what is actually happening here. And then the last part of the model is to really provide some space to explain what came up for you cognitively. What were some of the feelings that emerged? And what were some of the responses or the impacts? Using this model allows you to release your truths in a considerate way. It also helps you prevent holding burdens and avoiding the ambush of receipts. Now, don't get me wrong, I need my receipts. I often need to make sure I have itemized receipts for a variety of reasons. But if we're in difficult conversations, releasing without thinking through, what about the other person? Then we're not really sustaining a relationship. We're also not exercising transparency or suspending judgment. So I hope that this model can help to also understand that there is a difference between intent and impact. When we use this model really well, it helps us slow down the conversation, and it helps us be able to bring in the values of transparency and non-judgment to allow us to actually have a healthy conversation and perhaps prevent stonewalling or gaslighting, which are often strategies that people use when they feel trapped in a corner as opposed to being part of a conversation. When I was growing up in Zimbabwe, I was very lucky that I had many cousins. And I have to share with you that I probably found my best negotiation skills being part of a big family with my cousins. But here's another principle that you might want to think about, and that is reasoning. When you're only hearing one voice in a conversation, that's really problematic. Now, there are two framings that can sometimes happen when you're in dialogue with somebody. You can use your emotions to frame your dialogue, or you can use reasoning to frame your dialogue, and both will lead you to different outcomes. I often think of emotions being the death of reasoning, especially if emotions are not regulated. And that's why principle 2 is really important, to think about how do you regulate yourself. And so some strategies are helpful to reason, to have a conversation that's two-way, is to really think about how do you practice active listening? How do you think about what is being shared with you versus thinking about what to respond or counter? And you can do that through using I statements, through perhaps opening up the conversation with some open-ended questions versus questions that are rooted in why that sometimes have a judgment connotation to it. I often need to paraphrase and check in. And sometimes that check-in is completely wrong. And the other person says, well, no, that's not actually what I'm saying. And it allows us to build some clarity. I've also had to practice sitting in silence. And so for some of you, that might be an area that you might say, I've already done that. I've got that down. Or for others, that might be an area that you need to strengthen. Silence is often the turning point and the aha moment in most conversations. It's just that we're not taught long enough to sit in silence because we feel like it's uncomfortable. And then, of course, reframes. The reframes help us actually articulate what we mean so that the interpretation can be received in the right way. When you create logical reasoning as part of principle 4, it actually allows both you and the other person to come up with a co-created collaborative solution. And it also helps you to support each other, to hear each other's perspectives. I know for many of you, after you're done having that conversation, you're probably like, it is done, I'm glad, and that is great. And so we really end up with principle 5, and that is around reflection. I always, after a conversation, will take a walk. And for some of you, that might actually work really well. For others, you might actually need to get into something to just take your mind off of things so that you can come back and perhaps consider what went well and what would you change or do differently. Silence and inaction is costly. So when you have these conversations, it is courageous. It is bold to be able to actually say what you think, what you mean, how you feel. And so I hope that you'll also take care of yourself, because sometimes we don't remember the words that were shared, but we certainly remember how we felt and the energy that it took to sit with somebody as we navigate tension. I want to take you back to that conversation that I mentioned earlier. My conversation with that person, after hearing the words, I respectfully withdraw my request for your support. As you can imagine, didn't follow any of these principles. And I stayed in that conversation on the receiving end of hearing a one-sided version mixed with fear tactics and little opportunity to actually respond and perhaps even take some level of responsibility for where we both went wrong. You might have a memory in your mind where you might want to go back in time and wish you could, and perhaps say or do something different. Meaningful dialogue takes time. It's like a muscle, but it does allow you to strengthen relationships. And it's sometimes in relationships that we actually both heal and repair not only ourselves, but some of the work that we do at our organizations. So it's my hope that you will recognize, you will regulate, and you will prepare. You will release with consideration and reason with empathy. And as you consider how to approach your next conversation, it's also my hope that you will draw on these principles as a way of thinking, how can you change? How can you reflect? And how can you grow in these relational conversations? I also hope that you will consider what actually helps you protect your peace. Because honestly, not every relationship is worth saving. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rohene. That was
Thank you.
fantastic. Oh, my name is your name on here.
Well, you know what? That means that we both get to clone ourselves today, Nathan.
Awesome. But yes, thank you for that and for these principles. We're gonna open up the Q&A session right now. So if you have a question, please drop it in the chat or in the QA, and then we can hear the answer. So we can start things off. You had talked about the importance of being able to sit in the silence and that discomfort. I have seen it a lot where people just feel the need to keep on talking. It's like, I need to say something. You're just staring at me. Let me just fill in until, I think I've landed on the right things to say. How do we develop that skill? How can we get better at just sitting in the silence and
Yeah.
allowing these thoughts and stuff just to permeate our minds?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. And I hear you. I think it continues to be a journey that I'm on. So I certainly don't consider myself an expert by any means. And so I'll offer two strategies that I find are really helpful. The first one is to just acknowledge what's happening in your body. You'll be surprised that when you do that, it gets the other person to sort of check in with themselves as well. And so sometimes I'll actually say, gosh, what you just shared, it's making my heart race. Do you mind if we just pause for a second so that I can check in with myself? And so when I acknowledge that, that might actually also give the other person the openness to also check in with themselves. And it also gets them to think about, wait a minute, why would our heart be racing? Is there something that I said that made that happen? So that's the first thing. The second strategy that I often do to sit in silence is I offer that to people, especially if I notice that, let's say, somebody else is bringing up something that's really challenging, and I can see that they're struggling to articulate it, and they're just now rambling, but they're finding themselves rambling, and then I can see they're getting redder and progressively redder. I will sometimes say to them, would you like to just pause for a second and let's just both collect our thoughts? And that is also a gracious way of being compassionate with people, to recognize that we're humans, we're not robots, we don't have these answers, and we don't magically put a display on that is so perfected. Sometimes I have something that happens in my neck. I get progressively red, like a line of red all of a sudden starts to come up in difficult conversations. And here I am. I have no way that that's happening. I have no idea that's happening. There's no mirror that's there. And I can see sometimes people are noticing this. And so I actually have to say, hey, just FYI, if you see this, it's something my body does. So those are some strategies that I would recommend that help us stay grounded in some silence, that also gives us that space to think about what can we say next to move the conversation forward.
There's a lot of grace you're extending, especially if it's in a hard conversation. And oftentimes when we're in difficult conversations, we kind of take the stance as we're adversaries, right? Where
Yes.
there's a winner and a loser. So for you to say, do you want to take a moment? It's like you're giving them time to re-up and to come with more ammunition to come against you. And I think that can feel very threatening for people where it's like we go into conversations thinking there's a winner and a loser. I have to come out on top. And so when I see you stammering, that could be a sign for a lot of people is, okay, you have them on the ropes, finish them. And now you're saying, I see you on the ropes. I'm stepping back and inviting you to come back in so we can engage in this conversation. And that right there is just such a shift in mindset, I think, for a lot of people of going away from entering hard conversations from a position of adversary to, I don't know what you call it, camaraderie or
Yes.
so it's just, I know for a lot of people that's going to be
Yeah.
very challenging to kind of shift that mindset and to really embrace that sense that I'm not trying to battle somebody. There's no winner and loser here. Even though oftentimes it's positioned that way, that somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose when we're in a tough conversation.
Absolutely, Nathan. And I really want to pick up on something that you shared. Like, many of us can sometimes go into the conversation thinking, I want the best outcome for everyone, right? Like, we have these really genuine intentions, and then we go in and you might find yourself in conversation with somebody who absolutely has a very different agenda, a hidden agenda, and as you mentioned, very adversarial. And so in those moments when I'm picking up what they're putting down, that's when I check in with myself. So I offered some questions about, like, how do I stay safe in this conversation? What signs do I need to watch out to be able to say I need to continue or pause this conversation? So if somebody is adversarial towards me and I can see that they are just trying to find the threads where I mess up so that they have to use that against me, then I actually just name it. I say, you know what? I thought coming into this conversation, we could be able to see each other's perspectives, but I don't think that's going to happen right now. So how about we come back another time when maybe we can actually have a good conversation? That also is so empowering. We, particularly racialized individuals, I think we sometimes find ourselves in organizations where we feel pressure to have to stay, especially if it's connected to our identity or it's connected to perhaps change for our communities. I have had to learn, absolutely not. If I'm not going to be respected, I'm not staying in the space. And that takes time to build that courage. So I do want to also offer that we can't control what people do, but we can control how we can respond and take agency where we can take agency.
Yeah, sometimes, it feels in that adversary approach, it feels like we are dominating, we're winning, but we're losing, right? By engaging in that type of conversation. You're not going to get what you need from that, and they're not going to get what they need when we're having these very difficult conversations. So how do we create that safer environment where I'm able to adequately express myself and vice versa so we can come to a genuine resolution? All right, awesome. Someone had a question here. Have you experienced significant variance in the effectiveness of the approach? So with different cultural contexts, region, country, and I'll even add in another one in terms of power imbalance, right? So versus if you're talking to a friend, your partner, a boss, your boss's boss, an executive, right? Like,
Yeah.
how does that change the principles?
Yeah. I would say the principles stand. What needs to probably shift is your approaches, right? So, for example, in the case of, I would say, somebody who you have a romantic relationship with, being in a position to say, well, this relationship, I don't need to really nurture it any further. Well, that's probably not the case. You would want to make sure that it stays in a place that you can heal, that you can repair, and that you can move through the difficult conversations. But the approaches might be that you have conversations in chunks until you get to a point where things are perhaps heated, and you might say, this might be a good time for us to pause. Let's say if you're working with or having a conversation with somebody who's in a position of power or authority over you, this is really where, and there might be individuals who are on the call who are in leadership roles. This is where the responsibility of leadership is to be able to break down that power differential. So if somebody's coming to you as an employee who's really sharing something that is going wrong at the organization, or maybe just going wrong even in your team, it is up to you to really lower your power distance so that you create that safety. But let's say you're with somebody who just obviously doesn't get that and doesn't understand that. Then as an individual, think about your sphere of influence. Think about your sphere of power. What I mean by that is maybe don't have the conversation in their office. Because when you have the conversation in their office, they feel safe. Like this is their space. Maybe take the conversation into a neutral place. If, let's say, you're having the conversation and it happens to be in the meeting in front of your peers, and you're recognizing, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be the odd one out, and this is feeling like I'm being slowly ostracized for my opinion, then you might want to just say, hey, I just noticed that I might need to think a little bit further about the idea that I've just raised. Can I come back to you? And perhaps maybe some of you can think about, offer them a question, give them something to do so that they can also think about those. So absolutely, the aspects of culture, of race, of power difference, of the actual nature of the relationship, those will definitely inevitably impact how you can approach conversations. But the principles are just that, they're just principles. They're legs to stand on so that you can have the conversation from a relational perspective. But as I mentioned, not all relationships are salvageable. So there will be some relationships that you might actually say, look, this person is fixed mindset. There's nothing that I'm going to say and no way that I'm going to approach them that they will change. And so if you are sort of working with an individual like that, then choose what you need to actually engage in and then create a boundary to say, I'm not going to do that. And that's okay.
Hey, I appreciate that. Ray says not all relationships are salvageable. Words to live by.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that definitely opens up a whole other can of work. Like, how do you know, is this worth salvaging?
Yeah.
And do I want to invest in this type of relationship? Is a whole different other can of worms we can go down. But we have another question here. It says, are there any additional tips for dealing with difficult conversations when the relationship is brand new? So if I've just started working in this place, I don't have a rapport with my boss, or I don't have a connection with this colleague, how do I start to figure out, am I getting what I need? Is this a safe place for me? Are these the type of conversations that we're able to have in this type of environment? Can this person be trusted with this type of information? How do we kind of feel out new relationships before we know too much about somebody?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I love that. And I can imagine for anyone who is new in their career, that exactly is I think a space and place to be in. Here's what I would say is experiment. But don't experiment with the large topics right away, right? So an example would be, let's say you notice in your organization that there are incidents of racism and discrimination, and it's bothering you. If you're new, you might want to first test out that conversation with somebody who is perhaps at a level that you're working, so that you're at a peer-to-peer level, so that you can maybe ask questions. You can say, are you noticing this? Are you, what historically has the company done around this? So that you can gather information versus perhaps taking that straight away to your boss. Not to say that you won't do it, but experiment with different people what the issue is. The other thing is, let's say you're taking it up to somebody who you report into. Experiment with something even as small as, hey, I notice our team meetings, happen to be virtually, and you require us to always put our camera on, but that can be sometimes challenging. Can we talk about this, right? Like it's in the grand scheme of many other topics, it's probably not as big, but that will give you a sense of, is the person you're talking to flexible enough to hear you out? And how are they responding? And what questions are they asking? Are they right away saying to you, absolutely not, this is how it works, just deal with it? Okay, then you know the type of person that you're working with. It also gives you insight into what motivates them. Now, people have different motivations. For some of them, it truly is about the people that they work with, and they have this sort of desire to ensure that you're having a healthy, thriving environment. That's the goal that every leader should be aspiring to. But there are also some leaders who are motivated by the bottom line, the profit margins, success, metrics. So as you're new and you're feeling out the organization, you'll start to get a sense of, where is this person? Are they in this sort of humanistic realm? Or are they more in what feels like a materialistic realm? Or are they in between? And then you can frame your questions from the perspective of, this isn't working for me, and it's actually impacted my ability to do this. And even better if you have some concrete examples, right? So when you look at the DAE model, describing and bringing those factual pieces become even more important, because it keeps you out of the story that you can build and actually puts you in a position where you can offer tangible examples where the person can say, oh, I can see that. And they can follow your train of thought clearly. So those would be some things that I would recommend. And I'm sure there are many others that would come to mind probably at 2 a.m. tonight when I think about this question.
Yeah, that sounds good. I like the incremental, it's like testing the waters in that way and trying to identify. And it's good not only for testing with that individual, but this is a good way for us to practice difficult conversations, right?
Oh,
Where it's like, oh yeah, I want to talk about X, Y, and Z, but I'll start with the Zoom call. I will start with, how we do team meetings or whatever the case may be, the naming structure on the files in the folder or something like that
exactly.
that feels less threatening. And then you can slowly start to build up those relationships through that.
Yeah, totally. It's like a muscle, right? We want to be able to kind of just keep flexing it, keep strengthening it. And there will be times where the muscle will rip. And then you have to think about repair and how do you take care of yourself. So I love that.
So something that really stands out in that is intentionality, right? So it's
Mhm.
difficult conversations. You don't cross those bridges when you get there. This is something that you are investing in continually so that when you get to the bridge, it's like, okay, I know what to do here because we have a relationship. We have, I've worked this muscle out before. I've trained it in the gym. And now when I'm in the field, my body knows what to do, right? And so difficult conversations aren't something that we wait around for. They're something that we proactively prepare for by building relationships, having these conversations, practicing these certain skills, knowing what our needs are, what makes us feel safe. And so these are all pre-work that we do before you even get to a conversation, right? So this is not something that you get dropped into a difficult conversation and then all of a sudden you start trying to do all of these things, and that's going to help you get through it. Starting today, before there is a conflict, before you have that beef with the person, you're already doing all of this groundwork. And so I think that that's a big takeaway for all of us, is that we start today. The practice, the training starts today in building up these skills to help us to build these relationships and these muscles.
So true, yes. And I also want to acknowledge we're actually probably already doing this without knowing that it's a difficult conversation. If there are any parents in the room, you are likely having difficult conversations on a daily with your child, where you have to feel as if you're negotiating, but really what you're doing is you're helping them understand the world. And children are the best people to teach you about how to articulate intentionality in why you're doing what you're doing. Who are you doing it for? and to negotiate and compromise. So we're actually doing this on a daily, or at the Starbucks line or the Tim Hortons line, when we don't get the right coffee or we get the wrong order. Like, so there's actually little things that are happening in our lives that become fodder for practice. And so to acknowledge for each and every one of us that we have it within us, and that it doesn't have to be the scary thing for when it happens. Now you've got to brace yourself. And that's a mindset shift that we need to, I think, really move away from, is bracing ourselves that what's coming towards us is going to hit us hard. That can be true. And also what can be also true is we can meaningfully change if we are in relation with each other.
Love that. All right. Thank you. So another question here. So the principle of regulation, where we talked about identifying what makes us feel safe, especially in the workplace. What happens if what I need to feel safe is not present? It's not there. Like, what do I do?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I hear you. Where there isn't safety, create it. So what I mean by that is, if, let's say, the only way to have a conversation with your boss is you have to schedule a meeting through, let's say, their executive assistant or their secretary, and the person who you want to talk about is actually the secretary or the executive assistant, because perhaps maybe they're gatekeeping a lot of the meetings or policies that you need to put forward, then think about, okay, well, what is a roundabout way to get to your boss that doesn't have to go through the executive assistant? That's one way. Another way is, let's say you're in a room and you are sort of right at the corner and you're not as close to the door. And this is a big part for me, is physical safety. I need to be able to have my eye on the door and be able to know that I can quickly escape. If I'm not in a room where I have quick access to the door, I'm not going to go in that room. And that happens in meetings. It happens in one-on-one. So let's say sometimes physically you go into a room and you kind of take a look and you think, oh gosh, this room is just not, it's got the heebie-jeebies. I'm not gonna feel comfortable having a conversation in here, let alone letting sort of go. Then just say, this room is actually quite uncomfortable for me. Do you mind if we just take this conversation? Maybe we can walk and have this conversation. So where you can really shift the safety towards what works for you, try. I do understand that not everything can be solved. And so this is where, again, your boundaries are really important. If you don't feel safe enough, and that's why that's the first question I ask you is, what do I need to feel safe to have this conversation? If the answer is there's nothing that's making me feel safe to have this conversation, don't have the conversation. Don't put yourself, if you can, in that position where you're forced to have a conversation that you are going to be part of that 40% of people who report either ruminating for 2 weeks on staying silent, because that's the only way that you can be safe in the conversation. Or there's also a lot of studies that show around health and well-being that people that sometimes have these conversations where they don't feel heard end up overthinking and having a lot of self-doubt that can have a ripple effect into their performance and their work. So if you don't feel safe, don't have it. That is okay. That in itself is also a safety mechanism.
Okay. Yeah, that kind of ties into another question had around advocating for what you need, right? So now if I know what I want or what's going to make me feel safe, I know what I need from this relationship with the organization, but I'm not getting it. How do I appropriately advocate for those things and being able to express that, and sometimes it can feel threatening. I know I've been in situations where even just sharing what you need before I even have the conversation already feels threatening. It already feels unsafe to say this because, especially if it's oh, you're being too sensitive, you're too this, you're too that. If I share that I need this type of space, or "Oh, I don't feel comfortable having this conversation in your office," it's very easy to flip that and be like, why are you so difficult? Why are you this? Why are you that? Um, so I guess maybe you can touch on that a little bit in terms of more on that advocacy piece, and
Yeah.
where it doesn't even feel safe enough to advocate for what you need to feel safe.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I hear you. I also like you, Nathan. I have experiences of that where it's gone really well and people hear you and and people have responded in a great way, and then others who haven't. So I definitely, this resonates with me. Um, every organization will most likely have an element of commitment around respectful work environments, right? So policy statements, etc.
Mm.
And so I draw from that, and I literally use language word
Mm.
for word to be able to anchor my request in. Organizations also often have what is meant to be a human resource department that is there to support employees, or they'll have things like employee resource groups or advocacy groups. And so, if let's say the person that you're asking for a specific request is your boss and they're not listening to you, then you need to look at an alternative dispute resolution, right? That's often the ADR is typically the method that you want to think about, where you then get somebody else involved who can then mediate the conversation. And that in itself is scary. And I know not many people are wanting to go down that road because, again, they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be labeled the disruptor. The reality is that if this is impacting you significantly, then you owe it to yourself to at least try out the process. And then the third is to really have an honest conversation with yourself. And that is, if you're in a space that is not healthy, that is really toxic, and you have people around you that are not just simply not hearing you out or offering or providing what you need, should you really be in that space? And so I often will talk to a lot of people and coach people around their escape plan, their exit plan, because we don't have to stay where we're not respected. And that in itself is a shift in what sometimes is a counter message to what we're sometimes receive, which is feeling lucky that we were chosen, feeling lucky that we were given this opportunity. But that's actually not true. There is a level of needs that we need to have that need to be in place. And if that's not happening there, really question if that's the right place you should be in.
Mm. You had said something in the first point, and I lost it because I started thinking about your last one.
No,
Um,
the
oh,
anchoring in the like
anchoring, yes,
respectful.
perfect. Thank you. Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
really like that idea where it's like, okay, you've made certain commitments, you've said certain things, and
yeah,
so tying it back to what they have committed to, and showing, it's like, this is what you promised me, this was our arrangement, this is our agreement. So holding them accountable and really using that language, I think that's a really good approach. And then for the last bit there, talking about leaving, is this a place I need to be? 'Cause something I hear often is that is the fear, right? That not only will I not find another place, but is this going to be more of the same
yeah,
everywhere I go? This is just the
yeah,
the 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 cards I've been dealt with. I'm gonna have to deal with this wherever, so I might as well stay to a place where I know or I'm already comfortable. And it feels so risky for people to make that leap. And something I always share is, don't make decisions based out of fear. Make them out of power. And it's like, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to do. But never make a decision that it's like, I'm scared of what's out there, so I'm going to stay in here. We really want to make sure that we are making decisions that are sound, that are strategic, that are logical, and not driven by fear, because fear completely it crushes our logic. It completely crushes our reason, and we can't think clearly when we are in positions of fear and in states of fear. So I think really being able to reflect and be honest with ourselves is, why are we making the choices that we are? Is it a fear that I'm not good enough? Is it a fear that things won't get better no matter what? Is it a fear that I don't know what's on the other side of this thing? Right? None of these are good reasons to make the decisions that we're making. And so, again, really what you're saying, have that confidence that we have what it takes. We will be provided for. We can have the faith to step out, and it's going to be okay. Right? It's going to be okay. Never accept, because you don't know what's tomorrow holds, be a reason to stay in a bad situation, to stay in a place that you're not being valued. And so, I hope, again, that's another takeaway I hope that we all walk away with, is to recognize our own value, and don't let your circumstances and your context define you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, such important words, and thank you for raising that to really a higher vibration around worth and value, because I often think of there was a job that I did early on in my career, and I had a boss that was, as toxic as you can get in many realms. And there was something that he would do, which was, well, amongst many other things, but the one thing that he would do is that he would sign my contract in terms of an extension only on Friday at 4 p.m. And so I would be in this, consistent state of wondering, am I coming back on Monday? Like, should I pack up? Should I not? And because I knew that in 3-month increments they would be doing this, I started to really think about, okay, I have the next 3 months to figure out what do I want to do, because I'm not going to go into another cycle of this emotional violence that was happening within me as I was waiting to see, am I going to have a job on Monday or not? And so the more that you know more about yourself and how you can be valued and what you need and what should be there versus what isn't there, the more you know what you are not. And you are not somebody who's going to take less. You're not somebody who's going to be disrespected. You're not somebody who's going to be labeled X. And I can assure you that when you start to shift in the way that you've just described, Nathan, everything gets figured out really quickly. And we need to trust in that process, because the right people are out there who will see you. The right organizations are out there that will value you. Will the grass be greener? Absolutely not. But there is such a thing as burnt grass that will burn you out versus grass that will at least help you be nurtured. And there lies, I think, the opposite of sometimes what emerges in our minds as a fear.
Hey, well, I think that's a beautiful idea to end off on. So I want to thank you so much for coming through and blessing us with your wisdom. This has been a fantastic conversation. I see in the chat people saying how much they really enjoyed it, and how powerful it was. So thank you so much for that. For everybody on the call, we shared a couple links in here. We have a Slack channel if you're interested in staying connected. We have our monthly peer group. So every third and fourth Wednesday, we have our culture check-ins. And so there's just a meetup group for us to come together to share, to have conversations like we're doing today. So please come out. We know the importance of community when it comes to building resilience, when it comes to learning skills like having difficult conversations. The best place to do that is in community. We also have a link for our Mental Health for Success program, where we are offering you, members of our community, for free sessions with a registered psychotherapist. That's right, 4 free sessions of therapy. So there's no longer any financial barriers to you going and getting the support to help you work through some of the thoughts and unload some of the feelings and emotions that you've been holding on to. So please check that link out, and we'll get you set up with a racialized therapist who can understand your perspectives and the things that you've been feeling. Seeing a lot of thank yous. Thank you very much. This was very insightful. This was great. So again, thank you so much. We will have, I think we shared the worksheet in the chat as well for today's session. But this session, the recording and the worksheet will be on our website in the tools and resources section. You can find it, have the conversation there, and keep on working on these skills. And we'll have a survey that pops up if this was helpful to you. If you have any recommendations for future conversations you want to have, please let us know. We love the feedback. Again, Rohene, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nathan.
Really appreciate it.
Always. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Yeah, felt your presence and your warmth. Thank you for having me. Take care.
All right. Have a good afternoon, everyone.